Hello, and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. Legacy CDPs charge you a premium to keep your data in a black box. RudderStack builds your CDP on top of your data warehouse, giving you a more secure and cost-effective solution. Plus, it gives you more technical controls, so you can fully unlock the power of your customer data. Visit dataengineeringpodcast.com/RudderStack today to take control of your customer data. Your host is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Darren Haken and Tejas Manohar about building a composable CDP and how you can start adopting it incrementally. So, Darren, can you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me on today. My name's Darren Haken. I'm engineering director for a company in the UK called Autotrader. For those that on today that don't know who we are, we're the largest automotive marketplace in the UK. So we help people, predominantly cars, but any kind of vehicle that you want to buy and sell, we can help you with that.
And Tejas, how about yourself?
Hey everyone, glad to be on the show. I'm Tejas, co-founder and co-CEO of a company called HighTouch. We're a San Francisco-based, Silicon Valley startup. The overall thesis of HighTouch is basically that companies have a tremendous amount of data and insights sitting in their data warehouses, data lakes, and cloud data platforms like Snowflake. And our goal at HighTouch is to help companies do more than analytics with that data. So our goal is to actually help companies use it for operational purposes like personalizing customer interactions that are driven off of a CRM like Salesforce, or running targeted ads in platforms like Facebook and Google, or even just automating legacy processes that happen in things like an ERP system.
And going back to you, Darren, do you remember how you first got started working in data?
I do. So I actually started working in data about 15 years ago in a fintech, and I vowed never to work in it ever again. So about that period, it was very much focused on like traditional GUI-based reporting and all that kind of classical approaches that didn't feel very engineering, and my background is in engineering. So I made a big vow never to go back to it, but here I am. And so I think the space has become incredibly exciting over the last, 5-10 years, right? Where it's become more engineering focused, proliferation of AI, and other things. So I actually was a consultant prior to working where I am today. And I got really interested in how we help organizations unlock data. It became a very kind of key component. So most of the conversation prior to that would always be about like, how do we adopt cloud? How do we do really great things? Right? How do we build great products? And that the conversation shifted a lot to like, how do we do more analytically? How do we use ML? How do we use our data? And so I became very interested in that process. And so I've been passionately focused on that topic at Autotrader as one of the kind of key themes that I try to drive forward. So yeah, never say never, it would seem.
And Tejas, you've been on the show before, but for people who haven't listened to those episodes, can you refresh our memory of how you get started in data?
For sure. So I actually got started in the data industry from the vendor side. It's a little bit different than Darren's perspective, where he was, actually on the internal data teams at these companies. I actually was started on data, more working on data products. So it's about over 7 years ago, I actually joined a company in San Francisco called Segment. That was my first company sort of in the Silicon Valley area. And basically what they were trying to do was create this thing called a customer data platform, or this central place where all your data could go to so that it could be sent to different tools that a business team used. And that's how I got introduced to really the data space and data warehouses and all that jazz.
And I'll also add as a side note that I forgot to expand the acronym earlier of CDP, which is Customer Data Platform, as you mentioned. And so that kind of brings us into the core of what we're talking about here, which is what do you mean when we say composable CDP? How does that differ from the kind of general category of customer data platform as people have come to start discussing it?
Yeah, 100%. So, the idea of a customer data platform, as I mentioned, is basically a SaaS tool that allows you to send all your data to it. Usually, the way they work is they give you some sort of SDKs that you can use on your website or mobile app or server side APIs to track user events. So, user events and user properties are basically the fundamental types of data that you track into a CDP. Things like login, sign up, product added, cart checked out. And then once it gets into CDP, basically what the system can do, and popular companies in this space are tools like Segment, which is now owned by Twilio, or Particle, is basically they allow you to send that data to a bunch of different systems like Salesforce or Amplitude or Google Analytics or just different, hundreds of SaaS tools that any business uses. Now, what I saw when I was at Segment was basically that the data warehouse became this huge investment of companies. I mean, it had already been around for decades at this point, obviously, but with cloud data platforms like Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery, it became way easier to get data into a central place and as an organization, and much more accessible to all types of companies and teams. So effectively, what we came up with was this concept of a composable CDP, which means providing that sort of CDP functionality directly on top of the data warehouse as a source of truth, instead of using a proprietary SaaS system as a source of truth, because that never fully happens in our experience.
And so, Darren, you mentioned that you have kind of gone down this path of building out a CDP in this more composable paradigm versus the monolithic approach that came to kind of dominate the category in the earlier iterations. And I'm wondering if you can just start by discussing what were some of the types of problems that you were trying to address by using this composable CDP approach that weren't necessarily readily solvable through the, I'll say, traditional, with air quotes, approach of just building out a data platform and having a BI solution that kind of necessitated going this extra step of moving into what could be categorized as a customer data platform versus just a generic data platform.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, the starting point of our journey into this CDP, or especially composable CDP space, was so we started looking at how we improve the technical platform, the underlying platform at Autotrader, of how we track users and understand user behavior, right? And so we've been doing that for actually several years using a product called Snowplow, which is a really great product to help you make sense of your users. And so we were using that readily. And similar to this ethos of the data warehouse, all that kind of rich behavioral data ends up in our data warehouse. And we built out a whole new kind of realm of really great insight, reporting, running A/B tests, right, and validating different experiments and all that kind of good stuff. So we reached a much higher level of quality with this user behavior data. And then we reached this point in our journey where we started to say, well, we have this rich user data. Let's start doing more with it than just experimentation, insight, reporting, and analytics, right? And so we started exploring different things, like we'd like to use it for personalization. Our marketing team also approached us and started asking to use this data and activate it in different tools. Like Braze is a marketing platform that we use today, but they have millions, right? Like the number of social platforms always grows. It doesn't seem to shrink. So we started looking into this space and stumbled across this kind of term, this CDP term. And so we started looking at the more classical monolithic CDPs. And like as Tejas said, they are like SaaS solutions, and they will do everything. So they have a ton of capabilities, really, and they bring them all together into a single platform. So two problems that we faced with that, well, there were a few, but two that stand out. So one is we'd already invested in the way that we track users today, and that is a key capability that a lot of these SaaS solutions want to take on. They want to be able to do that whole piece. And so in order for us to start adopting a CDP, you essentially have to re-platform so many things that you may have invested in. So, I mean, I'm sure lots of organizations out there have already invested in how they understand user behavior, because it's a key part, right, of building great products. So we kind of felt like, we'd have to throw all of that away for a monolithic approach. But also, we didn't need all the capabilities initially of a monolithic CDP. We kind of wanted, I mean, like the way we do product development is using Agile, right? So we want to do iterative development, and we want to approach our technologies in the same way. So when we looked at CDPs, we actually said, well, we want to go through one iteration of using a CDP, which is actually, let's help our marketing team. Let's send some of our user behavior, our rich user behavior, and send that to a tool like Braze. And then and then the answer is, oh, well, we have to buy a huge monolithic tool that does many capabilities in order to do that, and we have to re-platform. That's a huge commitment and investment. So I'd like to use Agile to be iterative about it. And that's kind of why we got very interested in this composable model of like, how do we select software that helps us unlock the next iteration, and so on. And I guess that's how you end up with a composable pathway.
There are a number of different directions that we can go from here. I guess one thing I'd like to get out of the way first is in terms of the kind of monolithic or integrated CDP that categorized the kind of initial definition of this category versus this incremental approach, is that it was an all-in-one solution, so it was easy to identify what are all the capabilities that I get out of it. Versus with a composable one, it's okay, well, now I have to do a choose my own adventure situation, which sounds a lot like the modern data stack, which is also a choose your own adventure. And now I have to do all the kind of baling wire and twine to keep it all held together. And also, one of the promises of that fully integrated CDP stack is that it has all of the opinions about how your kind of customer journey should look, of how to model this data, how to represent it into these different systems, so that a non-technical user can say, oh yes, let me go ahead and pull that off the shelf and, throw my credit card at the problem, and I don't have to worry about all the other engineering that goes into it. Versus with this composable approach, now because it's choose your own adventure, now I have to say, okay, well, I have to have a technical team on staff who can do all that data modeling, metrics definition, kind of integration path. And I'm wondering what you see as the overall kind of risks and benefits of that trade-off between the fully integrated versus the composable versions of this problem space.
So the benefit side of it is like when we're in a space where things could change rapidly, we're in an emerging technology space, things could be, we're in a space of innovation. This modularity can be really, really valuable because we can select the best of breed tools for different components. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting junctures we're at now with these CDPs. So there was a generation one, which is monolithic, and they built all these components and it's all in one. So you can go to market very quickly with it, but maybe you're not getting the best of breed with every component. And say I don't know, like with Chat GPT is a very topical point right now, but maybe like there's some sort of language processing model where we can do really clever things with the data, and therefore we can accelerate certain things around activating our user data or something. Having this modularity means you can slot different components in, right? And they can be best of breed and we can accelerate things. Whereas I think the monolithics are really good in a very stable environment when we understand the problem really, really well. And what we're really trying to do is just standardize it and make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that, or actually two things I'd add to that, is one, I think the monolithic approach to anything is actually good when the technology is like all adopted together. So I'll give an example here. Again, this is probably a controversial example, and I don't mean for any backlash here, but we're good partners with both Fivetran and DBT, and Fivetran has been adding, like DBT functionality to their core product, right? So, adding like a DBT cloud kind of version within Fivetran, and I think that kind of makes some level of sense. I'm not saying that like DBT won't be able to differentiate by building additional features and additional products on top of DBT, but it makes some level of sense because when you buy a data warehouse and you buy something like Fivetran and start getting data into it, the first thing you have to figure out is how do I transform that data? So it kind of makes sense to think of that as like a bundle in some ways, even though the technologies are separate. Whereas when a company, especially an enterprise company like Autotrader or Warner or some of our other like enterprise customers, actually look to, approach this problem of CDP and improve things like their personalization across email and ads, etc., they're usually a fairly mature company that already has a lot of technology across the board. Like one of the things Darren mentioned is the benefit of the modular composable approach is actually the ability to switch out the technologies. But the other advantage is honestly just to use the technologies you already have in place in your business. Like if you're already collecting data to the warehouse some way, you can use that. If you already built some data models in the warehouse, you can use that, etc. Versus the more packaged traditional CDPs tend to work off very rigid data models where everything has to be tracked in a certain way by the CDP, everything has to be modeled in a certain way, or the profile matching feature won't work, or the activation feature won't work, or the integrations won't work, or the audience builder won't work. And that's actually what poses challenges with these monolithic solutions is that, a company doesn't usually go on this journey together, like in one stroke. It's something that happens over time. The data stack is built over time, and you need to be able to create value on top of it. And that's where a solution like HighTouch comes in, is like, what's the fastest way to create value on this data? It's to start taking it from the warehouse and bringing it to other systems through this process of reverse ETL. The other thing I would mention is that there's this common misconception that a monolithic solution would mean, you don't need a technical team to support it. The reality is that since monolithic solutions like, Segment or Imparticle require you to track data in their format, from your website, from your app, etc., you actually do need an engineer to implement all that tracking, right? You need an engineer to actually go add code to your website that says, when someone clicks the sign up button, send a sign up event to a segment or a particle or a package CDP. And for like a Shopify store or something like that, that can be fairly straightforward, and maybe take like a month or something like that. But if you look at a mature enterprise, like Autotrader or a company with many business units, that could take 6 months to a year just to get some initial use cases set up, and then an ongoing process as the company evolves. With something like high touch and a composable CDP approach, you do need a technical team too, but just a technical team that can write SQL and access the data you already have. So the same teams that are using tools like Tableau or building reports or doing BI at a company today versus engineers that actually go change a product, which is generally quite a strenuous process at a larger company.
And to kind of dig in on that point a little bit more about the requirements of the engineering team, for the Shopify scenario, you're likely going to have an engineer on staff who can add that tracking code, but who doesn't necessarily have the expertise to understand how to manage the lifecycle of a data warehouse, do the data modeling to be able to figure out, okay, this is what a metrics definition looks like. This is how I enforce it at the different stages. It's a very different set of capabilities and probably a different scale of organization that are going to have those capabilities around. And so I think that maybe is one of the tipping points of where you go from monolithic CDP, because I don't have the data staff to be able to support all of that lifecycle management, and I don't necessarily have opinions about what that data modeling looks like, versus the composable approach of I already have invested in my data stack, and now I just want to be able to start getting better customer insights out of all of this event-driven analytics that I maybe have been piping into, the segments or the M particles of the world.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's really spot on. If you are a company where it's actually easier to go reach out to the website developer or the app developer and get them to change the site, than to talk to someone like a data analyst at your company, because that doesn't exist, then of course, there is real advantage in going on the monolithic CDP route. But if you're already using data a lot and using these BI data warehouse stacks, even if the data is not perfect, you probably have something there that you can work with that's much easier than starting from scratch. So that's kind of where the composable approach comes in. But both have some place in the world, I think. So.
And I guess it's a trade-off, right? Like you meet lots of organizations that start tracking users where they started with an all-in-one Google Analytics solution, and then they grow, and then they outgrow it, and they kind of move on to a different platform, or maybe they don't. So there's definitely choice there. But like, when it definitely just to kind of, I think Tay just hinted at something that seems to be a really valuable aspect that we've seen in terms of the benefits is a lot of the tooling that we use is very much like the modern data stack, and so that's actually been quite made it more successful for us as a more of a well established engineering team to adopt, because it's like, hey, you can use SQL, you can use DBT, and that data warehouse you've used for all sorts of other problems, that's readily and accessible. So rather than it being in the SaaS tool and they have to grok the whole scenario. But absolutely, it is trade-off. So yeah, it's not necessarily that monolithics are bad. I think I tried to emphasize the merits and value of a composable CDB because it feels like the industry is very indexed on all-in-one solutions right now. And so like, the new breed, or like the new paradigm of thinking about this is definitely around this composability and everything. And we always see this, right, in software, this oscillation between this back and forth between all-in-one, monolithic, and then we move to smaller systems, and then we go, oh, that was bad, and back. But yeah, I think it's good that there's choice.
And then in terms of the kind of generational shift where the monolithic or fully integrated CDP came about was, I'm kind of estimating it was probably around the 10 years ago timeframe, which was kind of the inflection point of when we started to move into the current area where we are now, where kind of cloud data warehouses were not ubiquitous. They were just beginning to come onto the scene. There were data warehouses as an architectural paradigm, but generally only for larger organizations, because you had to buy expensive appliances or run infrastructure on site to be able to manage it. Have DBAs who are expert in Snowflake schemas or Data Vault. And to where we are now with the composable modern data stack, I'm wondering what you see as some of the core kind of evolutions or innovations that came in that time period from when CDPs first came out as a product category to where we are now, talking about composing them out of multiple kind of bits and pieces rather than whole cloth, that led to the capability of having that CDP-like experience, but built on top of a more distributed and more choose your own adventure substrate.
Yeah, for sure. I'll add some. I'm sure Darren has some as well, from his experience in data teams over those years. But you mentioned one of the ones that I think is really the biggest and has a lot of cascading impacts, which is the separation of compute and storage, which really came about because storage became incredibly cheaper a little bit over a decade ago, which allowed these cloud providers to offer storage services for extremely cheap, like Amazon S3, and for products like Snowflake and Google BigQuery, and even things like AWS Athena and Databricks to some extent, to be built off of this fundamental innovation. And what did that unlock? So actually, you said something that was spot on. Like CDPs sort of came about around the same time as these cloud data warehouses. It's interesting because I think CDP companies and MarTech companies and ad tech companies were some of the original highest spenders and biggest customers of the cloud data warehouse platform. So when Snowflake was the cool kid on the block and getting to its first, my understanding is 10 million, 20 million of revenue, they were actually mostly serving MarTech and ad tech companies that were trying to find a technology that could store all their customers' data and build things like a CDP or other types of marketing technology or advertising technology platforms. So I mean, that made a lot of sense that the two technologies came about at a sort of a similar time. But what we actually saw was that companies ended up in using these powerful cloud data warehouses as an investment internally outside of the scope of just using SaaS tools like CDPs that obviously use things like Snowflake under the hood. And I think the biggest, the next biggest innovation I see was that came about after the cloud data platform and the separation of compute and storage was actually this idea of ELT, which just made it tremendously easier to run a data team in a flexible, agile way, as Darren mentioned. Like previously, since loading data into the warehouse was such an expensive and arduous task and something you had to really get right when you're doing it. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure out how to scale this thing up and go through huge nightly transformations and stuff like that. You just had to put so much thought into like what data was going into the warehouse, right away. And so there's no looking back, no way to run super, big transformations at scale once the data is in the warehouse. With the cloud data warehouse, that completely changed, and that made it possible for services like Fivetran to come up, which are like, you use 200 SaaS tools in your company, just click a button and we'll get that data into the data warehouse, which is a really powerful thing to happen in the ecosystem. And it also, enabled things like, okay, if you want to start using the data for a new use case, you can just transform it slightly in SQL and then start using it for a new use case in a platform like iTouch. So I think you mentioned it spot on, which is the separation of compute and storage and the cloud data warehouse is really what unlocked a lot of these capabilities for businesses. Darren, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think they're pretty much what I would say. I think one way I would position the data warehouse today, which I do think is important, is it's almost become an appliance. It's not just a data warehouse to write SQL queries. So like when I said I would never work in data again, that kind of generation of data warehousing that I worked in was very much, a SQL interface to access and query data. It was never ever considered to be like APIs and an appliance that I could use to do all sorts of things. Whereas now it does feel like the modern data warehouse, the likes of BigQuery and Snowflake, it's not just really about they can store massive amounts of data and it's in the cloud. They've got the appliance and they've got really rich APIs on top, and that gives the ability to create an ecosystem around it, such as High Touch and Fivetran. And so they've commoditized that whole space, and that's how we've ended up with it being like that centerpiece. So it is kind of different to just it is a warehouse to solve and query for analytical purposes. It's actually built an ecosystem around it, and I think that's helped make a real shift in the last decade. And then you're right, the ELT approach. combined with this kind of ecosystem and this commoditization of things, it's just made the ability to kind of get data in really, really fast and really easy.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd really add to that is, I mean, both of our responses are somewhat from a data engineering and data team perspective, but the biggest thing I saw change at companies between the inflection point and the creation of the CDP back in, let's say, 2014 to 2015, all the way to maybe 2018, 2019, when I decided to leave Segment and actually start High Touch, was actually that, when I first joined Segment, people's view of the data warehouse was completely different. They saw it as this advanced analytics tool that they would reach to when they couldn't answer a question in Google Analytics or Salesforce or Adobe Analytics or Omniture or one of those or Amplitude or one of those sort of specific analytics tools built for a certain role or function in an organization. If you couldn't answer your question there, then you would go over to the data warehouse and the data analytics team who would do some more advanced SQL and stuff like that for you. Now, when I left Segment, really what I saw was that all these technologies that came about, even for companies that didn't adopt the modern data stack, quote unquote, Fivetran, DBT, all that sort of stuff, wasn't even that popular at the time and still isn't even that popular in the enterprise as a whole. But even for companies just investing in things like Snowflake, Tableau, Looker, the data culture had really changed at those companies where, data warehouse and BI reports weren't the advanced analytics tool. They were the main tool people were going to answer questions about what's going on in their business and how their campaigns were performing and pulling user lists and all sorts of things. So if people are already using that as the main source of truth, why not keep investing in that and get more value out of it than starting from scratch and having, two parallel universes that you have to maintain?
Yeah, that's a good point actually around the culture. There's definitely a movement that I've seen around kind of non-engineering disciplines having a more like a hunger and an appetite for data in ways that 10 years ago you wouldn't have seen. Like a marketeer, for example, or somebody in an operations role, they want to do smart things with data in a way that I've not seen in the past. Maybe it's because we're exposed more to AI and ML and other things. I also find that people just know what cloud is more. So like you can actually talk about, say, Google Cloud or AWS, and people kind of know that in other roles when they work in companies. So that's definitely driving more kind of demand, I think, on data teams and engineering teams as well. That the culture is shifting, and we're seeing that as well. So that's definitely something I've seen.
I think, too, it's also a matter of the kind of perceived activation energy for any particular data request, where 10, 15 years ago, it was, oh, I want to be able to answer a question about X, Y, and Z. And it was, oh, that's actually in 3 different systems. So you're going to have to give me, a $500,000 budget in 6 months before I can answer your question. Whereas now it's, oh, okay, well, we are either already collecting that and I just need to do a couple more database joins, or oh, I don't have data from that system yet, but give me, a week and a couple of engineers and I can get that for you. So it's a much kind of lower barrier to entry. And it's also a much higher visibility of what data can do within an organization and the kind of importance of being able to combine data across multiple sources so that there is that kind of appetite for even engaging in that work versus where we were 10, 15 years ago. And then digging more into the kind of CDP specific aspects of that data experience, I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the kind of end user experience, kind of what are the roles that you're trying to serve by creating this kind of customer data platform as compared to a generic data platform that serves the entire organization for, logistics and page traffic and, whether or not I have enough stock or, my HR systems and just kind of what are the elements of that user experience that come together as you compose these CDP layers?
So I actually think they're kind of the same types of people. So because like my background and where I focus today at Autotrader is building platforms and platform capabilities, and one of the kind of components of that is we build the data platform, which is assembling capabilities around data, right, to serve people. And we actually think about internal users as customers of that platform, as well as our partners and our actual end users, our actual customers. And so they are customers like a marketeer and a salesperson and other things. So across all of it, for me, building technology capabilities that give them a great experience is paramount. I think within the realms of the the CDP space, I definitely see a huge focus from people like marketing. But then we've expanded and now we've got like customer service and sales. And so actually initially I thought, it's a more of a specific set of people, but I don't actually think it is from the data platform route. And I think that's one of the kind of benefits of a composable CDP actually is that, and I think we've either touched on it or completely pointed it out through this conversation, but it is the same sets of tools that the engineers get to use, but it's also that people, like somebody wants to use Looker to understand HR records, they also want to use Looker to understand some of their user behavior. But there's definitely components in a composable CDP where we do still want to offer a really good user experience to see. I mean, like one of the things they talk about in CDPs is it's basically profiles, right? It's like properties about Darren, for example, and who I am. And so like we do want to offer a good experience of that. So for us, that was actually using High Touch, where Tejas is today, because that gave us an experience on top of our data warehouse to kind of look at that, and it's domain specific to the CDP. But I also do want to stress the point of like it allows us to use generalized modern tools and techniques where it makes sense in a composable CDP rather than it all being specific to that technology. Tejas, I don't know if you want anything to add to that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think one of the important parts of the composable approach is actually not, it's not just that it's, more flexible, that you can start using the data in the warehouse right away, that the warehouse is the source of truth. It's actually that idea of the warehouse being the source of truth and building off the warehouse does provide powerful functionality to the end business users as well. So as an example, I'll just give like an example. We serve a very large pet store company in the US, and they've always had this challenge where they can't query, let's say, users based on the pets they have or based on the households they're in or based on these related models that actually fit together in a customer 360. A customer 360 view is not just the user and some traits about them and some events they took. It's all these connected objects that really reflect the customer. And with the sort of CDP based approach, you're operating off this event stream that you're capturing from your website, just, events users are taking on a website or app or stuff like that. With a composable CDP based approach like High Touch and our Customer Studio, like we can actually tap into all the different data models that exist in the data warehouse, leveraging the relational nature of the data warehouse and how powerful of a data store it is. So I think what's really exciting about the composable CDP approach is actually bringing the power of the data warehouse, its ability to store everything in the business, its ability to have all these really dynamic data models, its ability to have not just data that needs to be activated, but also the ad reporting and the campaign reporting and all the information about how these campaigns are performing so you can analyze the audience performance. And then bringing that to the actual business teams is what's really exciting to us. So on top of sort of the reverse ETL technical platform, which just allows data teams to sync any data from the warehouse to one of these 200 plus SaaS tools or ad networks or whatever it is, we actually have also built little apps. Like it was originally called Audiences when Darren adopted it at Autotrader, but now it's called Customer Studio, which is like a full-on visual app that sits directly on top of the warehouse for marketing teams to jump in, build audiences, run A/B tests, see how these audiences are performing, sync them to different tools that actually run campaigns. And I think that's really what's really exciting, like the ability to bring the warehouse to those business teams where they live.
Yeah, I think that's actually, you made me think about, I've got a great example of that. So there's two things right to the interface. So sometimes, and this is, I guess, one of the flexibilities about the data warehouse being central to a composable CDP is it isn't just about one interface, which is kind of what we're both skirting around really. It's about multiple. So there are certain scenarios where, say, a marketer in my org today would be interested in looking at data that would classically be visualized, say, in a CDP, but they're also interested in looking at like a campaign performance and marketing spend at the same time. And in that instance, they're in Looker for us, our BI tool, and they're looking in a world of their world, right? So they're doing that. And then in other times, they're using an interface like High Touch for different jobs. So it's different roles and different jobs. And I think that's one of the flexibility points that you get with a composable CDP, right? Is it's not a single interface. it can be multiple, and you can fit that to your organization.
Yeah, and I'll do a quick plug. We just released something today. Today, I'm sure it'll be not today by the time the podcast comes out, but we released something called Audience Analytics today actually that allows you to see some of those analytics of, how people in a certain audience are performing or how that campaign that's running off a certain audience is changing behavior like, revenue or purchase frequency or things like that, and do some audience level attribution directly inside of the high touch platform. And frankly, I think it'd be hard to build some stuff, some features like that on top of a more packaged CDP model because you don't have all the data in it to sort of close the loop. Whereas the warehouse is the source of truth for the rest of the business, like your product analytics and your, inventory and your store, in-store purchases. Like if you actually walk into a physical store, which allows companies to, really analyze things full circle in one platform.
Another aspect of the CDP experience that is advertised a lot is the idea of the kind of customer journey of kind of charting the path of the customer through your overall experience from, first exposure to your business all the way through to they've bought one of your products and then maybe they come back. And I'm wondering kind of what you see as the level of importance of that as a feature of the CDP and maybe some of the ways that you are working to kind of recreate that experience in, one of the layers of that kind of composable environment built on top of the warehouse.
Totally. I mean, what we find is that customer journey is basically just a series of different audiences, customers who added something to their cart but didn't check it out, customers who did check it out, customers who abandoned their cart but are high value, customers who abandoned their cart but are low value. This is really just a series of audiences built on top of each other. And sometimes there's some, air traffic control type features above those audiences. Like we have a feature called priority lists, which means, customers can only be in one of these audiences at a given time. And here's sort of the waterfall, they're either in this one or they're in the next one, or you can sort of plot out that whole user journey in a UI. But yeah, I mean, what we found is that since the data warehouse is the source of truth and has all the information around the business about, the customer lifecycle from all parts of the business, it's the best place to build those sort of interfaces that help you find out, what customers are in this very exact situation, or even figure out, now, did a customer open the email that you sent to them? Or did the customer click on a link that you sent to them, etc.? Those sort of closed loop metrics.
Yeah, I think one of the important pieces when you approach a composable CDP that is definitely worth investing in is good foundational, whatever you pick, good foundational technologies about how you track your users. So like for us, we use Snowplow for that. And it's the garbage in, garbage out problem. So whatever tool you pick, or if you write your own, you do want to have a data model or user tracking. The tracking space needs to be robust and of high quality, because then you end up with high quality data into the data warehouse. So I definitely recommend people who listen to this to think about that space. And I think that's one of the interesting parts about composable CDPs. Like when I looked at the market of CDPs, they were never exceptional at every piece. So we'd find that like they'd be great at visualizing a funnel or something, but then they like how much emphasis are they putting on data quality and data governance on the tracking space? Like I've never found one that was master of all things. So I would, no matter what you pick, monolithic or composable, for me, one of the key things that's enabled us to drive forward and go really fast with is to think about tracking. But outside of that, in terms of the visualization and like looking at how like the user behavior goes through, I often found that a lot of people that are in that space, they actually want to look at it in different ways. So like if I speak to a product manager that's looking at like the checkout process, the level of granularity and detail that they want to explore the data is completely different to, I don't know, like an executive who just wants to see like a high level conversion funnel, or a marketeer and one that, so I think one of the things that comes out of having the data warehouse there and like having the rich data underneath it, and we can store it all now thanks to cloud data warehousing, is you can have multiple views of a funnel. So I've not seen a solution that solves everyone's problems and everyone's needs and everyone's interface is all in one solution. That sounds amazing if it exists.
In terms of the kind of adoption path, I'm wondering for people who are kind of evaluating the possibility of composing their own CDP, what do you see as the kind of minimum baseline for, you must be this high to enter this ride kind of a thing? And then from there, what are kind of the first incremental steps that they would take towards saying, okay, now I have this baseline. Now this is the next thing that I need to add to be able to start getting to the kind of overall vision of I have an entire CDP. I know everything that my customers are doing at all times and how they progress through these different experiences. And, my business is now running like a finely oiled machine.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. So a couple things. I would say the most important thing we tell our customers, and we try to take a consultative approach and really, work with their marketing teams, work with their data teams, work with their chief marketing officer or chief information officer to, figure out what's the right approach for the organization. And the biggest thing I tell them is to focus on the business use case, like not the technology. I've seen so many companies that approach the problem of CDP saying, we want to build this grand source of truth. We need this feature and that feature and this other feature. And then when we get into the company, we realize that they actually have some data sitting in a Tableau report that they need to automate to a system like Salesforce or Adobe and Braze. And while I'd love to charge them $1 million for that, I don't know if it deserves that sometimes. So I think, companies don't always need a grand solution to solve their problem, or they don't always need this whole like checklist of technology features. They need to focus, especially in this economy, like they need to focus on, what's the business problem they want to solve and what's the fastest way to do that with the least moving pieces. And I think that's why this composable approach is really taking off, especially in these times when companies are tight for budget and are looking for projects that can deliver value quickly and are not looking to spin up huge initiatives that need to change the whole world. And then the second thing I would mention is that a lot of people underestimate their data maturity. Is my perspective here. Darren and the team at Autotrader have actually quite a strong data stack, with tools like Fivetran and DBT and Snowplow. But a majority of our enterprise customers, don't even have one of those SaaS vendors. Like, the only SaaS vendor they're using for the modern data stack is actually High Touch as their CDP, and maybe they even see it as a marketing technology solution than a modern data stack solution. And the reason for that is because a lot of these large companies, as I mentioned, are already using tools like Tableau or Power BI. Like maybe they don't see it as a data warehouse; they just see it as those sorts of systems that they're using as their source of truth. Whenever there's a question that comes up on how a campaign's performing, or whenever someone needs to pull a list of users that match a certain criteria, whether it's for the marketing team or for the finance team or for the support team. So what I like to tell companies, like, hey, if you're already using the data warehouse today through your BI tool for analytics, you should probably start activating that data. And yes, you might need to make it better. Yes, you might need to work on some data modeling or data quality, but you need to do that no matter what solution you go with. It's better to invest in the thing you're already using, especially since it's the most powerful technology on the block, than to start from scratch and try to build a whole new world.
And in terms of that adoption path, and particularly on that question of data modeling, data quality, I'm wondering what are some of the elements of the ecosystem that are available to accelerate some of that adoption path? I'm thinking in terms of, pre-built DBT packages that I can use to say, this is the data that I'm getting in. I know that I want to transform it into this model to be able to enrich this customer profile in this way. Or you mentioned Fivetran a few times, just kind of like the data integration path. Is there a kind of core set of data sources that are useful for being able to build up these rich customer profiles, and just kind of adding jet fuel to your kind of go-kart for being able to go from I have this idea to now I'm ready to start putting this in front of people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is definitely the modern data stack has lots of components now that help get to market fast. I mean, like one of the first the use cases we had around composable CDP was we did have this rich data. Tejas is right. Like there were so many companies that they have data somewhere, unless they're a brand new company, they have some data. And even if it's a spreadsheet or they can get it into a data warehouse, that's great. But then to go to market quickly for a lot of companies, it is about things like Fivetran or other tools like that to get data in quickly. And then we're definitely seeing this ecosystem of like DBT packages and other common transformations. Like we use a help desk solution. There are built-in DBT packages that kind of give you a starting position straight away. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like we're seeing that ecosystem of that happen. And that's helping people very quickly. And then I think the other side of it is tools like High Touch help you get data back out super quickly. Like I remember our first scenario with the Composable CDP is we had some of our profile data. We wanted to be agile and say, right, what's the first business case or useful thing that we could do with our data? And like I said at the beginning of this, it was around like, well, let's activate some of that data and put it into Braze. And that's actually when Tejas and I started working together. Is we used High Touch and we kind of got that working in a day, and that's great. And so I think the fastest route is probably picking technologies that help validate the use case. We don't want these scenarios where it takes 6 months, I think you said, right, for a whole business plan of tools and solutions to get there. So I do think a lot of the kind of modern data stack already helps with some of this. One of the gaps that we definitely saw was the reverse ETL, or like the getting data back out part. And that's where I think tools like High Touch are helping kind of close that gap as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of other opportunities for Tejas and his product launches to help with all sorts of other problems anyway as well.
And so, in your experience of building out the CDP capabilities at Autotrader, one of the kind of useful ways for other people to learn is kind of what were the most informative failures that you made on that journey?
Ooh, that is a good question, isn't it? Well, the first failure was probably when we started to look. We lost a lot of time trying to just pick a CDP. Actually, if I'm honest, because it was expensive. It would have been. I mean, our data volume were like one of the largest in terms of traffic in the UK. In terms of like people visit Autotrader a hell of a lot. So it was like, okay, well, we've got this business case. And then to actually validate it, it's a huge upfront cost, and so we actually lost a lot of time because that felt like the only solution at the time was to go and buy a CDP and then work out how to integrate that with the rest of our data technology. So our first failure was that, rather than saying, it's like we lost our ability to think about agile and iterations and validating business cases or something. We got lost in a world of vendor management. So don't do that, I guess. And then I think the other thing that we tried to do was have like a single data model for profiles, like because a lot of CDPs do have one, like they have a profile. It's the profile of Darren and of Tejas, but we've seen it be a little bit different to that, where we've ended up with a few variants of that. So maybe there's profiles that are more tailored to like help with customer service and customer support, and that's kind of different to somebody that's looking at prospects and leads and sales operations and so on. So I think trying to embrace the fact that the data models may diverge or iterate, or you may have failures in it, rather than like we can create one global profile and it will solve all of our business problems, also was quite painful. I think they were the two. We definitely saw a risk or a pain point of not wanting to deal with the reverse ETL. It's super costly to just push data to places. And so before we found tools that did reverse ETL, like High Touch, I think the other thing we realized we were going to lose a lot of time over was just building all the pipes and all the connections. And, just even like, I don't know, a marketeer wants to use a wholly brand new social platform because we think it could drive engagement with our brand or something. And then we have to go back and say, it's going to take 3 months of effort, or we'll put it on the backlog. Like that lost innovation was a problem as well. But yeah, the two biggest ones were getting lost really in we need to pick a solution that solves all of our problems, I guess. Like we need the CDP. And then I think it was just as a byproduct of that, we also need all these global profiles that support everybody. And actually, I think we've gone more sort of messy and accepted that, and it's been helpful, or more variety.
And Tejas, in your work of building out these CDP capabilities at High Touch, what are some of the kind of dead ends or missed opportunities or kind of misdirections that you've gone through?
Yeah, so I think early on in High Touch, we always had this conflict as a company. Like, are we building for the data person, or are we building for the marketer, or what core persona are we sort of building for? And it was a question that came from everyone, everyone from like startup incubators we participated in. For example, we're a Y Combinator company here in San Francisco, to investors when we were fundraising, to partners like other tech companies we partner with, like Snowflake and Databricks and Google Cloud, or even consultants, like let's say a Deloitte or something like that. They would always ask us, are you guys for marketers or data people? Because that's sort of the paradigm that exists in the market today. There's marketing technology tools and data technology tools. And again, what I said earlier, I really stand by, which is that the exciting opportunity of the data warehouse and of these cloud technologies is to make them accessible and to use these cloud technologies and their power to actually bridge the gap between technical teams and business teams. So we've just decided to embrace that we are a platform for both data people and marketing people and other operations teams across the company, whether they're helping support or finance or other teams. And that's just kind of the nature of what we're building. And one of the powers that we actually have certain sections of the app, like the area where you can connect to your Snowflake, or the area where you can define some data models with SQL or selecting tables and views, that are built for data people. And then we have other areas of the application where if you want to get marketers in the application, you can let them use the audience builder, or let them click a few buttons to sync data to destinations. And yeah, just like serving multiple personas versus just saying, we have to be a company that serves one user, which is sort of the fundamental rule, I think, of building a company that seems to be out there, is really important. And I think that's one of our big differentiators, between the Composable CDP and the rest of the market. I mean, it's not just composable in terms of being able to plug it to the technologies you use, but it's able to plug into the different teams and organizational processes that actually exist in a company. So you're able to leverage the data team for what they're good at, the marketing team for what they're good at, and compose that together into a strong solution for the overall organization. So yeah, I think just embracing that and really leaning into it, versus in the early days we had an identity crisis around that, is one of the biggest mistakes, and then later biggest successes of our company that we plan to just keep doubling down on as we scale.
And I think that's super important. Actually, that is definitely something that we were trying to work through when picking a CDP, that it couldn't just be an engineering tool, but it also couldn't just be a tool that we buy at SaaS that's like really good for a marketer to use and engineering hate it. So I think any tools that emerge in space that can like bring these communities together and help them solve problems together is really powerful. Like that's basically a tension I've witnessed across all of my career with different disciplines in engineering. You don't want tools that like, I hate them for picking this tool. I hate you so much. It's awful. There's no API. Engineers. I'm always going to speak to the engineers in that one. But then, marketers, like, you've picked the really complicated engineering tool. I don't understand it. And it's all in code and they don't get it. Like you need tools that bring them together, because it is a multidisciplinary problem space.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the SaaS tools in the market are taking the stance, which is like, do this without engineers, do this without technical people, or taking the stance where, technical people can do everything or something like that. Maybe that one's a little bit less common, but for marketing technology, I think that's really silly in the end of the day. And in reality, what is the data team if it's not working with the business teams? And how is the business team going to handle all these data concerns without having, some sort of analysts or engineers or someone technical to help them out, no matter what solution they buy? Because as you said, Darren, companies already have data if they've been around for a while. And yeah, that's something we're really leaning into, and think that there's a cultural aspect that we can really change over the next 10 years with pursuing this like data activation vision, in the same way that the data warehouse changed a lot of the analytics culture in the company over the last decade.
And in your experiences of working in this space, both from the side of implementing a CDP for your company at Autotrader and working in the space of providing some of these capabilities to consumers, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen people solving the problems that CDPs are aimed at?
Totally. So I think let's get technical for a minute, because I feel like we've been talking about, more data strategy for a while. I think something that's interesting that we've built in our platform, that we actually built back when we were just doing reverse ETL, which is still an awesome part of our platform and what a majority of our customers use us for. But something we built was this idea of change data capture directly off of the data warehouse. So a lot of times we see when a company writes a reverse ETL script in-house, before they buy something like Hightouch, they often have written scripts in-house to get a little bit of data in Salesforce or Braze or Facebook or whatever it is. And often what those scripts look like is basically, a for loop or something like that over results from a SQL query that grabs all the data, like, select my whole users table once a night, loop through it, send it to the API of something like Salesforce and Braze. And there's also many optimizations that you can make from a basic script like that to a platform like Hightouch, from like batching to retries to dead letter queues to how you handle failures and all sorts of things. But one of the ones that I think our customers don't think of as much is this idea of running like a delta directly inside of the data warehouse and figuring out what changed and only sending those changes to the downstream tools like Salesforce and Braze, etc. So in Hightouch, it's really cool. Like, you have an interface where you can just say, I want this column in Snowflake to be in this column in something like Salesforce or Braze. And under the hood, we'll only be sending the changes over time. And the way that works is we actually, save a copy of, the state of the SQL query that you're using in Hightouch, whether it's generated by audiences or whether you input it directly into the Hightouch UI. And we save the state of that inside the warehouse and do some joins and delta calculation in SQL to figure out, what's changed since the last run, and only send the changes over, which makes the syncs way faster, as well as, more efficient on these downstream tools, APIs.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most innovative or exciting pieces around CDPs that we can see emerging, that clearly Tejas has also spotted, which is this real time component. So that they all tend to let you sync data into them real time, but the activation piece is usually a little bit different. So I think the more innovative ways I've seen people do it is where they start to get closer and closer to like real time things, like, I don't know, providing to somebody who's like on a help desk, right, and saying this person's not happy, or they're more likely to buy this vehicle because XYZ and things like that. Like, the more things we can do around that space just feel like they're more novel for people, but they shouldn't be, right? And it's because technology has been intrinsically more kind of batch or daily. When I've spoken to other companies, they seem to fixate on like a daily batch decision making process. But yeah, the more we can move into like the real time space and being able to also activate in real time feels like a big step forward.
And in your own experience of working in this space, what are the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned personally?
The like the ML space, the AI and ML space feels really challenging still today, I think. So a lot of it's been around like sending information to other parties and other things like that. But yeah, definitely some of the other challenges that we've definitely been picking up on, and it's probably more combined with real time actually. So like doing AI and ML in batch and stuff feels good, but then I guess like the other novel way of thinking about stuff is, how do we do real time relay of data, push it into some sort of prediction, and then like relay that back on and things like that. So I still think that this space is, to answer like the challenging point jumped out in your question for me. It's still really challenging, I think, for orgs to solve that problem about like combining all of this, and that's the case even with like a monolithic CDP. In fact, I think that's even harder in that space because it's all closed off within the SaaS solution. At least in my org today, like we have access to streams of data and the data warehouse and other like data stores, so that's helpful. But yeah, like combining all these things, composing it, and then using it for doing things like AI is helpful as well. And it's still challenging. It's solvable, right? Like engineering can do it, but there's definitely some like primitives, I imagine, that would make it much easier to solve.
I agree. And actually, the stuff Snowflake and Databricks have been adding here, BigQuery as well, around streaming inserts in BigQuery, which they've built something similar in Snowflake now. Snowflake Streams, which is like native CDC, so you don't have to do any of the hackery Hightouch does on all these different data warehouses, as well as like AutoML, I think, from BigQuery, where you can just use that directly in SQL. Like, those three concepts together are quite inspiring. I think right now as you mentioned, it's still a lot of work to string that together. And maybe you can't quite get that real time prediction experience that you mentioned, Darren, super easily. But you can see the writing on the wall that, the clouds have recognized this fallacy that you have to have, like, a data where like one system for batch and one system for real time, and are starting to improve that. And there's some really exciting case studies out there too. Like, I know JetBlue has a case study with DBT where they're actually getting flight bookings and operating on them within 2 minutes of it happening in the GDS system where flight bookings are actually processed, which is pretty epic. Excited about where the space is headed.
And for people who are trying to address some of these kind of business concerns and get visibility into their customers, what are the cases where a CDP, whether composable or monolithic, is the wrong choice and they're better served by just going the kind of build your data stack and build your BI and be done with it?
I find it difficult to separate the two out, right? Because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think this is some of the beauty I find about composable CDPs is that I don't have to pick. Like I could, I think a lot of scenarios where people, people have approached me and seek advice maybe about like picking CDPs, and at that point, usually when people speak to me, they've already picked a CDP or they have a couple and they kind of want advice on, did we look at any and what works for you? And usually I try to discourage that until I've worked out, I guess, that they have like, do you have a data warehouse and do people use a BI tool in your company and access data? And it's like, I know it's like the maturity model thing, but if somebody wants a CDP but they don't have some of that stuff, sometimes I actually try and push them back to just get better with some of the analytical stack, the modern data stack in first place, because it's a foundational piece of technology for lots of use cases. So, and I think that's where I would discourage people or say don't do it. Is sometimes you dig into things with people and they'll say like, we want this CDP and we want to do it so we understand our customers or something, and it's like, well, maybe you don't need that. You just need a reporting platform and some customer data or something like that. So with all of it, it's just trying to push people back in that direction as a starting point. I think you need these foundations before you layer on things like a CDP. It feels the wrong way around for me to say, let's buy a CDP, and then after that, we'll kind of invest in a data platform and in an analytical platform.
Yeah, I think what Darren said is spot on. It's a hard question to answer because in reality, I think, the most important thing is what problem are you trying to solve in your business, and, where are you at today with solving that problem? And then you can figure out the right path from there. Too many organizations get hung up in trying to build this modern stack they see online, whether it's a modern marketing stack, which shows a CDP and a brand new ESP and, maybe something like LiveRamp for your ads and all these tools that's going to cost you like $3 million total. Or if it's a modern data stack where companies think they need every tool in the modern data stack to proceed building their data infrastructure. And in reality, companies already have data, they already have tools. You need to figure out what's the problem you're trying to solve right now, what's the fastest path to do that, and just start there versus trying to run RFPs for the most common tool set. And I think that it sounds obvious when you say it this way, but it's not super obvious because there's all these like FOMO and fear tactics that different vendors are putting online, saying, what good is bad data, or you need a CDP to do personalization, or without the modern data stack you can't do analytics. And that's just really confusing. I think the vendors that will win ultimately are the ones that focus on clarity and education, and telling customers very specifically how to solve the problem they have at hand and when to use their solution, when to use other solutions.
All right. And as you look to the future of this composable CDP ecosystem, are there any kind of new components or capabilities or tool sets or kind of educational resources that you kind of hope to see introduced or that you're planning on kind of working towards?
Yeah, for sure. So on the data side of things, I think we're always making our platform more and more robust. So as the core cloud data platforms that we're built off of actually add features and capabilities, we're looking at how to hook into all of those things, whether it's, auto ML and in something like BigQuery, or whether it's Snowflake Streams, which is again that change data capture feature, or whether it's the materialized views, features of these platforms that now have some incremental processing for certain things like averages and different aggregates. So we're always looking at those. We always get super excited when there's a new release. It sounds nerdy, but it's true. We get really excited across the whole company when there's a new release of Snowflake or Databricks or Google BigQuery, because we're like, how can we bring this value to our customers, and how can we make our platform more powerful based on all the improvements coming to these platforms? On the marketing and business side of the equation, we are just trying to, take basic workflows that require asking someone for a CSV today, simply put, and to bring those all into the platform in a really streamlined way on top of the data warehouse. Because today, people just don't see the data warehouse as a tool for them unless they can write SQL, which is really crazy, in my opinion. Like, it's the best data source in the company. It should be more accessible. And I don't think self-service BI and the tools in that space, while great, I just don't think they fulfill that vision. Like, even for me in some of my day-to-day tasks, I don't feel like Looker quite serves me, to be honest. And so yeah, we're adding more capabilities. We're not a purist about, we just have to be syncing data. We're adding more capabilities that make it easier for our customers to solve these challenges in a streamlined flow. So like, you build an audience, you sync it to places. How do you do an A/B test on that audience? We don't want to make you have to buy another 3 tools to do that. Or how do you analyze the performance of that audience and see what the impact of this audience is on those, users' behavior? We want you to be able to do that directly inside of a platform like HighTouch too. I think the best of breed nature of it will allow companies to go invest in best of breed tools to do that even more. But for companies that just want a flavor of analytics on their audiences, or just a flavor of experimentation, we want to really streamline that for them. Because the processes that a lot of companies have today are just so archaic. So that's what I'm really excited about, and shipping more features that streamline that process for the different business teams.
Yeah, I think for me, the future is a combination actually of more like the data strategy and community piece and the technology. So like certainly over the last, I don't know, like we built at Autotrader, we built a composable CDP maybe about 12, 18 months ago. And they just couldn't find anything. The fact we're even using a term composable CDP is quite new. So I think I'd hope, certainly for the future, is we'll have more of a community that can talk more about CDPs from the perspective of engineering. And there's like stories of you asked the question around Tobias around the sort of novel ways. Like the more we can get that out in industry and people talk about it, and there's tech talks about like we did it this way and this is how our CDP looks, and that's exciting because it will help us learn from each other. So I think that, and just more data strategies emerging actually that adopt composable CDPs, out visible, that we can see. Like people do this a lot with DBT, and they'll talk about like architectures of how they've built it. So the more like that will be really helpful. And then I just think there are components, so like HighTouch are working on some things that I see as gaps in a composable CDP, like the audience creations and maybe like smart things to do with activating them audiences and all that kind of thing. But I suppose with the and so there's loads of tech there, I think, that is exciting too. But definitely, hopefully, a future for me is definitely the data strategy, the community, and the conversation as well.
100%.
And are there any other aspects of this ecosystem of the composable CDP or the work that you're doing at Autotrader to implement it, or at HighTouch to support it, that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
No, I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah, I think we went pretty comprehensive.
Yeah,
all right. Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with either of you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you each add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspectives on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
Oh, okay. So my answer is data catalog / metadata tooling in a modern space. So this is an area that I'm very interested in. Like how do we, I'm very passionate about data mesh and data products, which is a very decentralized technology architecture. And with that decentralization comes a need for many different kind of capabilities. And I think the metadata space is very, very interesting for me. And that's another example as well of why I think things like composable CDPs are really interesting. So like we're looking at a few companies now that exist out there, like there's open source products like Data Hub and a Munzen that is metadata tooling. because our profile data, our user data is available, I can automatically index them in that space. But in terms of the modern data style, that's one piece that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, on my end, I think it's what we touched on earlier, which is just the ability to do different types of compute off a central cloud data platform. So I think it's really, really exciting what obviously Databricks has, where you can, use Spark and actually have access to the native data and run any compute you want, but you also have a really easy to use SQL engine on top of the data warehouse for more like BI and analytical workloads. I think that needs to be taken a step further. I see, the Snowflake folks adding Snowpark. I see them adding things like materialized views that can be, incrementally processed. So I'm excited for, these cloud data platform companies to offer multiple modes of computation directly off one platform and one source of truth when it comes to data. Even if that data is copied multiple times or something under the hood, I just want that user experience to be available for platforms like HighTouch and for all the companies that use these technology platforms.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time today to join me and share your experiences and perspectives on this emerging space of the composable CDP. Definitely appreciate the time and energy that you're putting into that and in sharing your experiences. So thank you again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other shows, Podcast.init, which covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used, and the Machine Learning Podcast, which helps you go from idea to production with machine learning. Visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends and coworkers.